As we do every week, it's time to speak to one of the finest thinkers of his generation, the best-selling author of groundbreaking works including The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds. Douglas Murray. We will get to the most extraordinary day in US politics shortly, but I was delighted to see you in The Australian in recent days, writing about Australia's divisive race obsession, including, as you put it, this endless guilt-tripping and apologies that we seem to be trapped in.
Yes, that's right. Obviously, it's ahead of the vote in Australia. I've been following this pretty closely, and I have indeed been following it for many years. And I felt perhaps it took an outsider to say some of this, but I'm horrified by the sorry cycle that Australia has found itself in recent years. Very few countries I can think of in my own lifetime have been through this sorry spiral in the way that Australia has. You mentioned earlier, Rita, my book, The Strange Death of Europe, which is about immigration. But I mentioned there the phenomenon across all Western developed countries of the sort of endless digging up and apologizing for our past, and the weird way in which it is a sort of only a Western obsession. And I wrote there in The Strange Death of Europe years ago about the way that Australia was especially caught in this cycle. And so, yes, I've been wanting to write about it for a long time. I was glad to get the opportunity this week.
And more on that observation of the apology loop, you also wrote about how when you travel around this country, the typical Australian no longer seems to be sensible, happy-go-lucky, bold figure of old. Are Australians becoming too afraid to be proud of their own country?
Well, I think so. And I think it starts, as I said in the piece, from a very basic place. The same question that Americans, Canadians, and others have to ask themselves, which is, broadly speaking, are we glad that the people who found this country founded it? Or do we think they shouldn't have done? Do we think that Australian Aboriginal society ought to have been left as it was in perpetuity? Do we think that Columbus, when he sailed out and found the Americas, should have turned back home and said, nothing to see there, guys, no land of opportunity at all? Or broadly speaking, do we think that it's just that history happened? And, you know, in the case of Australia, an extremely undeveloped civilization, which the Aboriginal societies were, confronted a very modern society by the standards of the day and lost out. And, you know, bad things happened, as they always do. But should Australians in the 21st century be made to feel that it would be better if they weren't in Australia? That it would be better if this land had not been discovered by the outside world and specifically never settled by the British? Or was it a good thing? And I think that it all starts from there, Rita. It starts from whether or not you're, broadly speaking, glad about the society you're in, or you think it's all just been a big disaster and it would be better if all the non-Aboriginal Australians just sort of sailed away and let the Aboriginal peoples of Australia enjoy and thrive in the way they did before the British and others arrived.
Just on that endless guilt-tripping and apologies, it's now extending, Douglas, to preschoolers. Now, 2GB reported on children making sorry cards for actions of colonisers against Indigenous people. The messages on the cards included things like, sorry for hurting the Darawal people, sorry for hurting you, and also messages like, we will be kind now. I mean, this collective guilt and emotional blackmail is now being inflicted on children who are too young for school. These are preschoolers.
It's grotesque, Rita. It's absolutely grotesque, and it's child abuse, what's more. It's absolute child abuse. None of these children did anything wrong. Nobody, for generations, can be given any, can be made to be held accountable for any wrongdoing. This is, you know, and in any case, this we're going to be kind now. Again, sorry, I have to come back to this and say this. Are the Aboriginal peoples all kind? Were they historically? Were they to each other? Or were they brutal and bloodthirsty to each other like most other peoples in history? You know, this ridiculous conceit that only the sort of white Western European settler can ever be guilty of anything, and everyone else lived in this Edenic paradise, is absolute guff and rot, and it should not be foisted, especially on children. To tell children from the beginning that they have any moral culpability in things they didn't do is wicked. It is child abuse on a massive scale. Future generations will realize that, and I wish that this one did and realized it fast.